Hello, welcome. My name is Austin Seagrave. This is my sixth talk on the third evil, which is liberalism, following on from the evils of Nazism and communism, making a trinity of evil ideologies whose implementation has been a disaster for mankind. Anti-racism is a core component of liberalism. This talk looks at the black side of anti-racism. Excuse me. What does black mean here? Black is neither a race nor a person. No one is black, as no one is white. Biology does not recognize those names. Neither does humanity. Neither does goodness. Only evil recognizes those terms. Therefore it follows that black is not a body. Black is something in a body. Black is consciousness, the consciousness of being black. If you don't have the consciousness, you are not black. Africans do not have the consciousness. Africans are not black, just as I am not white. When I look in a mirror, I am conscious of spots and wrinkles, and I need a shave, but not of a color, not of being white. I'm not white. I have a wholesome identity. As a Zulu is not a black, but a Zulu, so I am not a white, but an Englishman. Who is black, i.e., who has black consciousness? Who, when he looks in a mirror, sees not a human face, but a black? Only a slave does, and only those slaves descended of Africans who were sold in slave markets and bought by Europeans. But slavery was ended 200 years ago. It seems not. A process of liberation seems not to have been brought to a closure. Let us ask, what is a slave of any sort entitled to? Freedom, obviously, and compensation, i.e., unpaid wages. Have these two conditions been satisfied as far as the African slaves and their descendants are concerned? Indeed they have. The slave trade was abolished 200 years ago. Slaves were set free 200 years ago. And as for compensation, their descendants have received a compensation more than royal. They have actually inherited the very islands on which their forebears slaved. So the conditions of justice satisfied, the whole slavery business should be dead and buried, a chapter in the history books. And so it was for 150 years. Until, beginning in the 1960s, the corpse was dug up. Why was it dug up? Surely, after all I have had to say about anti-racism from the white point of view, you can answer that for yourselves. But what about the descendants of the slaves, those now enjoying those cherished islands in the sun? Surely they are too busy enjoying themselves. Surely they don't want to be reminded. Surely under the palm trees, by the clear waters of the enchanted seas, they have forgiven the suffering of their forebears. Surely, since they are but human, they have yet a residual aversion to the descendants of the slavers. It seems not. It seems the process of liberation has not yet been brought to a closure. Is there any relationship in all the world more poisonous than the relationship of master and slave? The wise and loving counselor says to those in any poisonous relationship, you must just walk away. But in this most poisonous relationship, the walking away has not happened. On the contrary. Okay, we can understand the anti-racist whites pursuing the blacks, pursuing and crying, "Don't be frightened. We only want to say sorry. We only want to give you a kiss and a hug and ever so much love. We only want to look after you. We're your mother. Come to mother." We can understand the blacks leaping to their feet and fleeing as fast as they can, crying over their shoulders, "Leave us alone, we don't need you. You're not our mother. You're spiders dressed up as mother. Yours is a parlour we will never enter again." But the blacks did not leap to their feet and flee. They entered the parlour. They couldn't let the whites go. They couldn't resent a shelob, a bloated white spider, when it came trailing sticky thread and offered them a womb. They had been set free, but they had not set themselves free. They still have that to do. Meanwhile, they are still enslaved in their souls. That is the meaning of black. Remember, Zulus are not black. They are Zulu. Remember, I am not white. You know what the meaning of white is. Independence has no colour. To put this in tragic terms, due to many generations of suffering, the African slaves lost their African souls. An alien soul entered and took up residence, a white soul. So no wonder, when that soul looks in a mirror, it sees the wrong face. "I'm black," it cries. "I'm black." What does the healthy soul do in slavery? What did Moses do? Moses, in Egyptian slavery, cried to Pharaoh, "Let my people go." And when at last hard-hearted Pharaoh relented, Moses and his people went. Spartacus in Roman slavery roused up his fellow slaves and commanded them to victory after victory over the armies of Rome. But his soldiers had only one longing in their hearts, to go home. That is what freedom meant to them. Home, beloved home. Spartacus knew that they couldn't go home safely until Rome itself was laid waste. But he bowed to his soldiers' longing, was caught and crucified. It took Ulysses 20 years to get back home after the fall of Troy, but he never gave up. And when at last he got home, he wasted no time, and with his deadly bow cleaned his house of all its guests. What does freedom mean to the prisoner? It means that now at last he can go home. Why does the caged bird never sit still? Why does he peck at the bars of his cage? Why does he sicken and die? Because he longs for freedom, for his home in the free air and the flowers among his kind. What does the surviving Jew do when the Auschwitz gates are opened? He hurries with all his strength and heart and soul to the promised land. The instinct of freedom, the instinct of home are one and most strong. Listen to the spring returning swifts. Listen to their cries of joy, like children let out of school. Not so the black. His shackles are not on his ankles, but in his soul. Why? Start by not telling lies. The poor unemployed Jew does not migrate to Auschwitz for employment and a better standard of living. He doesn't consider Auschwitz his true home. Start by not telling lies. 20 years of obstacle were nothing to Ulysses in his determination to get home. Where there is a will, there is a way. For the black there is no will. There is dependency. Any other specimens of dependency not on chemicals like alcohol, but on human beings? There is the well-known phenomenon of institutionalization. Long-term prisoners and soldiers suffer this. Freedom is terror to them. Some go mad, some commit suicide. Counseling can save them, and a long, slow program of rehabilitation. Any others? Germans spring to mind. They are still dependent on Adolf Hitler. They cannot let him go because they did not free themselves from him. Remember the progression of the sick German soul to health. Hitler savior becomes Hitler devil, becomes Hitler human. Notice that the Germans have not even begun to move on from Hitler devil, the incarnation of evil I have heard him described as, which is their refusal to take responsibility for doing what Hitler told them to do. It is very clever of them to have made Hitler a scapegoat. As long as there is a graven image on the altar, it doesn't matter whether it's a god or a devil. I notice that the Russians have dug up Stalin. Russians no more than Germans are used to freedom. One other specimen of dependency, one most cruel, the raped woman's dependency, psychological dependency on her rapist. Pimps use rape for this very purpose. Clinging is easier than freedom. Dependence is easier than independence when the habit has entered the soul. Consciousness is pain. Skin consciousness is pain. Ask any aging actress. Blackness is consciousness of yourself from a white point of view, as age is consciousness of yourself from a young point of view. Black consciousness is not pride, but an aching self-consciousness. Black consciousness is an aching consciousness of being different. Black consciousness is an aching consciousness of being wrong. Black consciousness is an aching sense of being not white. Remember, Africans are free of all this. Africans are not dependent. Africans are not black. To understand this, remember Hans Christian Andersen's Ugly Duckling. But Hans Christian Andersen didn't get the story quite right. He sentimentalized it. In the version without sentimentality, when the swans sailed in sight, the ugly duckling refused to join them. Refused to be, in truth, what he was, a beautiful swan. Why? Because between him and the beautiful swans was a black water. He would have had to cross it. Staying with the ducks, even as an ugly, was safer than crossing that black water. Clinging even to a falseness is easier than the risk of going across the black water to where your truth lies. And Hans Christian Andersen did not tell you that meanwhile the ugly duckling hated the ducks because it was only the ducks that reminded him of his wrongness, his falseness, his self-betrayal. Clinging even to a devil is easier than letting go. Letting go is the most agony. If the ducks had loved the ugly duckling, what would they have done when the lovely royal swans sailed by? They would have cheered him across the black water to join the lovely royal swans, even if it were a journey as arduous as Ulysses' homeward to Ithaca. But in the unsentimental version of the tale, the ducks can no more do without the ugly duckling than he can do without them, because his ugliness reminds them of their handsomeness. They cling to him. They can't let him go. But they have suffered a fright. He might have risked the black water and left them to be mere dull ducks. so their clinging undergoes a change. To keep him, they no longer mock him, they flatter him. He feeds on their flattery, wants more and more of it, resulting in a mutual clinging to falseness, like two straws clutching at each other. Too far gone for truth, the poisonous pair can only go on and on, deeper into dementia of demand and appease, that soon ugly is handsome, and handsome is ugly, and ugly is the real duck. And any duck who retains his sanity and dares to quack the truth is drowned as a devil duck. The end of this unsentimental version of the ugly duckling, I do not know. I do know that in the heart of that particular clinging to falseness called black is a hatred not static but incremental, exponential, a hatred that in the past has ended up in a once-y mind and final solutions. In this case, final solutions for the problem of racists. That is the name given to those who either are unrepentant whites or who reject being white at all and return to a positive and healthy identity. Anti-racism is nothing less than re-enslavement. Keeping the black in his blackness is keeping him in his enslavement. Didn't need them during empire, suddenly need them. So, of course, the bones of those dead and buried slavers of old must be dug up and spat on, because those old slavers were practicing the wrong enslavement. Anti-racism invited the blacks to settle, like inviting Jews to settle in Auschwitz. Love would have banned the invitation. Love would have scorned the invitation. Self-hatred accepted. The blacks came to hate, they stay to hate. They tolerate us just as long as we continue our self-destruction. All their incremental aggression is against their truth, their freedom. Blackness is an African in denial of his Africanness, which is his truth, which is his freedom. Africans are not black, are African. Each African, like each Zulu, has his belonging as deep-rooted as a tree, has his true home as deep as earth, has his true name known only to himself, his kin, his forebears, and the sacred soil. So listen, black, listen to this. Black man, to be free, you must let the white man go. Go home. In home is healing. Home is where you are not black. Finally, a note for Africa. Africa is not yet truly independent. For independence, Africa requires the eradication of blackness. Africa cannot step out into an African future until Africa cuts blackness out of her soul. To do this requires a recognition of blackness as a deadly negative, not white. Africa cannot step into her African future until Africa stops being not white. Let go, forgive, forget, step into the dawn. Africa must therefore do these three things. Bring home the exiled children at last, eradicate the colonies. You may have changed the name, but you have not changed the colonies. And number 3, speak African, not European. And a 4th, which must remain as yet unspoken.